Now, as ever, we are blessed when Dermot Gilleece of the Sunday Independent has trekked in heroically. Hello, how are you?
I'm good, Joe.
Blessed, I said.
Blessed, yeah, Jesus, that's what an intro.
The US Open is on this week coming at Pebble Beach, which instantly gives it a certain gravitas and a place in history, because we haven't had many US Opens at Pebble Beach, but all of them in their own way loom large across the tapestry of US Open, certainly, and even across golf right from 1972 onwards, and we'll kind of trek down memory lane. But Pebble Beach, for the uninitiated, is in one of the more spectacular, beautiful parts of the world in California.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. I saw it for the first time in 1981 when I went out there to cover the Walker Cup, in which Philip Walton and Ronan Rafferty played, and that was at Cypress Point, which, as you know, is just down the road on the Monterey Peninsula. And Pebble, it's amazing, like, we didn't hear that much about Cypress Point up to that time, but Pebble had already created quite a stir in the golfing world, even though it had played host to only one US Open by that stage. But I think it's just where it is, you know. The site was just spectacular, absolutely.
Yeah.
17-mile drive is just behind it, which is probably the most expensive real estate in California, and that's saying something.
Yeah.
You know. In 81, Philip Walton, as I say, was playing in the Walker Cup, and his brother Alan went over. And Alan and I shared a motel room, actually, for the week. And one of the first things he did was to arrange a game at Pebble. And I think he played about 7 o'clock in the morning. And it wasn't cheap, but he thought it was the thrill of a lifetime for him at that time to play it. Alan's a good player. I mean, I think he was probably playing off 2, I think, at the time, you know. But he loved it.
And of course you could, because it's a public course.
Yeah,
I was checking green fees last year, about $525.
Yeah, I think there's a catch, though. I think you have to stay in the lodge as well.
For 2 nights.
Yeah.
I didn't check the price of the lodge, but I wouldn't say it's cheap.
Yeah, I think you're looking at around $750 a night, around, you know, minimum.
I mean, it would disgust me, but I think I would do it.
Yeah, I leave that one to you, Joe.
You'd want to play well. So the Monterey Peninsula, funny you mentioned Cypress Point. I was down to Paul McGinley recently down in Lahinch at the media day.
Yeah.
And he's played his fair share of nice golf courses, and he said Cypress Point is his favourite golf course in the world. So this part of California is just made for golf. Yeah,
Cypress Point has the famous 16th hole, where you hit across an elbow of the Pacific. 232-yard par 3, and gorgeous hole. That obviously loomed large in the Walker Cup.
Yeah.
But and then of course it developed a reputation then through what was originally the Bing Crosby Clambake. I think that started sometime in the 30s.
Right.
And went on from there, you know, and Pebble was part of it at that stage.
When we're talking about US Opens at Pebble, as you said, the first one is 1972, Jack Nicklaus. 10 years later, 1982, Tom Watson. 10 years later, 1992, Tom Kite. They then broke that 10-year tradition because for the year 2000 they wanted something special, and that is the famous Tiger Woods performance, maybe the great performances, maybe the greatest of performances we've seen at the US Open. 10 years after that, Graeme McDowell pops up. Now that's an illustrious list.
Oh, it's remarkable. I think it's remarkable in that the quality of the winners, you know, I mean, and the way they won. Each of those players, now, well, Woods did a whole series of spectacular things, you know, but each of those players did something special to win, you know. In 1972, you had the famous Nicklaus won iron to the 17th. Well, it was the 71st as it happened. He won by 3 shots, so it didn't matter that much, but it was the quality of the shot.
Yeah.
And I was just doing a bit of digging there, and I was surprised to discover that it was 218 yards long at the time, whereas now it's only 208.
Yeah.
So it's actually shortened. But on that occasion, he was hitting straight into a Pacific wind. And apparently, like, he just hit this thing low, arrow straight, pierced the wind. It hit the pin.
Yes.
And came to rest about 6 inches away.
One of the great birdies. I've never hit a 1 iron.
well, I mean, you've no right to, given what you play off. No, I don't mean it that way, Joe. But I mean,
that's fine. We'll wrap up the interview now. We're done. What is it they say? Only God and Jack Nicklaus can hit a 1-iron or something? Is that their great saying?
I think Trevino used to, he used to talk about things like that, yeah. But, the 1-iron, although Padraig Harrington, and I've no doubt he's correct, he reckons that the 1-iron that Nicklaus would have hit was the equivalent of about a 3-iron now.
Well, we can console ourselves with that.
The lofts have all changed.
Right, well, we'll tell ourselves that anyway.
Yeah.
So that was Nicklaus in 72. He finished on a score of +2. And then 10 years later in 82, you had Tom Watson, who finished on a score of -6. So clearly the weather is going to be a massive factor.
Oh, the weather. I mean, when Nicklaus was playing, it was a fierce Pacific wind. I suppose you have to assume that most of the difficult wind at Pebble is going to be coming off the Pacific. But in 82, Watson. I think the significance of 82 was that it was the last time that Nicklaus challenged for the US Open. And he had always in his mind that a fifth one would have given him the record. I mean, I think 3 or 4 people have won 4, including Hogan, and going way back to the beginning of the century. But this would have been Nicklaus's chance to win a record 5th. And it didn't happen, of course, because, Watson decided on the 71st again, this great par 3. He chipped in, as we know, for a birdie. Apparently, he used to dream about this. When he was at Stanford University, Watson would make trips down to Pebble Beach, which would have been about 120, 130 miles away. And he would play the course as a student at Stanford, and he had this vision that in a US Open he was going to find himself in a situation to win, but to do so he'd have to do something spectacular over the last 2 holes. He probably imagined birdieing the 18th, but as it happened in 82, it was the 17th that delivered the goods for him.
Because when you watch that moment back in that famous par 3 and he's in the rough off the green, he's going to have to give it a decent clip to get it out of the rough. It's US Open rough, but equally that makes it very hard to stop the ball. That's his conundrum. Now, folklore has it that he said to Bruce Edwards, his caddy,
This is going in.
Forget about putting this close. This is going in.
This is going in, yeah. I would believe that simply because of the positive thinking that dominated people like Watson by that stage. You know, that they felt like that they really believed that extraordinary things could happen when they were going to win things. And Watson, I believe, would have thought that. You know, I mean, obviously he was lucky. I mean, it was going at a fair lick, I gather. You know, it would have been about 10, 12 feet past had he missed. But again, something very similar happened, say 10 years later with Tom Kite, you know.
That, funny enough, the Tom Kite one, of all of those wins, Nicklaus, Watson, Tiger Woods in 2000 and Graeme McDowell in 2010, 92 and Tom Kite, his 3 under par win, with only 2 players under par.
Yeah.
That is the one for me that I know the least about, or that is least famous from afar, you know, of the ones I haven't experienced. Yeah. You would have been there in 92, would you?
Yeah, that was my first year, and that was the year, oddly enough, when Phil Mickelson made his professional debut. And his first round of golf as a pro was a 68 around Pebble Beach. And he was 2 shots off the lead at that stage. Next day, he shot an 81.
Wow.
Having birdied the 18th. So reality hit in pretty quickly for him. But that was, 92 was very difficult. I mean, again, I was doing a bit of digging, and when Kite won, I mean, the wind speed on that final day was around 35, 40 miles an hour. I mean, and on exposed terrain like that, you can imagine the sort of challenge that was going to create.
Because the thing about Pebble is they have designed the course where as many holes as possible are hugging that rocky terrain, that coastline.
Yeah, well, I mean, not that many really. The 7th, well, the 6th comes up to the edge of it. The 7th is clearly right into the Pacific, and then the 8th is alongside the 9th, 10th, and then you go inland.
What's the one where you have to hit over the corner? You know, you actually hit it out over the sea. I think it's Jack
that's
Nicklaus's,
the 8th, yeah. That's a beautiful hole.
I think that's Nicholas's favourite shot.
Oh, it's a beautiful hole,
unbelievable.
that, yeah. And then the 17th and 18th are obviously the iconic finishing holes, again with the Pacific dominating.
Right, well, isn't that plenty then? Can we not agree that it is plenty of holes?
It is, yeah, it is. But I mean...
in 30-mile-an-hour winds it is.
Well, it is, except that... you know, people have this, Americans particularly, you know, this links thing, you know, and it's not a links, obviously. It's parkland by the sea. And but they love the idea. I mean, it seems to give it the edge above all other American courses. Not only is it by the Pacific, but it's a links in the true sense that, you know, St Andrews and Muirfield and all the rest.
But it's not in your...
But it's not. Well, it can't be, because a links is determined by the nature of the terrain, and it's parkland terrain. I mean, it's very similar. The greens are poannual, like you would get in my home club in Clontarf, and the terrain generally is clay, parkland clay, you know, and... you're going to get a different reaction to the ball than you would, obviously, on a links. It's interesting that they've now put in sub-air on a whole load of the greens. Again, you wouldn't dream of doing that if there were pure sand greens, which they're not, obviously.
Yeah. So anyway, that was a brief tangent. That was my fault. Tom Kite, 3 under par in 92. Was this a good US Open? Was it enjoyable?
There were some very interesting elements to it. David Faherty played in it, and Ronan Rafferty played. They both missed the cut, as it happened. But on the Thursday night there was a party, and the party was given by the Fishers, who lived on 17 Mile Drive in one of the houses there, like that. If you wanted to buy it even then, you'd be looking at a minimum of $30 million, something around that sort of money. And
in 1992?
In 1992. I remember writing at the time that it was 25 to 30 million. If you wanted to even think about buying it.
The Irish GDP in 1992, was it?
We were invited anyway to a party there on the Thursday night. And
journalists as well.
Oh yeah, anybody hanging around.
You wouldn't be allowed to brush the floor now.
Anybody hanging around was invited along, and we went. And Faherty sang. He sang a couple of Puccini arias, which was his favourite operatic stuff.
Wow.
And he finished off with Danny Boy, which was gorgeous.
Wow.
It was really lovely. And brought the house down. This was on the Thursday night. Joe Carr was there as captain of the RNA, because he was obviously captain that year, and he'd come into office the previous September 91, and this took him right through. And as it happened, as a thank you to the Fishers, who were our hosts that night, Joe invited them to be his guest at the Open Championship at Muirfield a month later, because again he would have had special accommodation allowances and stuff like that as captain of the RNA. But Pebble was very special to Joe, and he loved the idea of going back there. For instance, in 1990 he went out there with a group of, I think it was about 16 members of Sutton Golf Club to celebrate the club's centenary. But prior to that, in 1961, it was his only time to really to actually compete there. He was beaten in the semi-final of the US Open by a guy called Dudley Wysong, and that was a huge disappointment to Joe. I mean, I remember at the time reading that Henry Longhurst wrote that not a soul here bore any ill will to Wysong. This was Joe's opponent.
Yeah.
But everybody seemed to want Joe to win. It was a 36-hole match. Joe was 5 down after the first 18.
Okay.
And it was a hell of a tribute to him that he took Wysong to the 18th before losing. Now, Nicklaus, in the meantime, beat his opponent by 9 and 8 in the other semi-final, and then hammered Wysong by 8 and 6 in the final.
So it would have been a good final.
So everybody was, they saw this as a meeting of transatlantic giants. Nicklaus, who would have been 21 at the time,
right,
and Joe, who would have been 39. But this was of Walker Cup players, of course, and this was the big thing that didn't happen.
That's a pity.
But Joe, anyway, came back, as I say, in 90, and then again in 92 as captain of the R&A. So there was a lovely touch to that.
It's quite extraordinary that players like Flaherty are in a house on a Thursday of major championships singing away and partying. I mean, not unbelievable, but just amazing, certainly by today's standards.
I'd have to say, Joe, that, I mean, as I remember it, they were probably gone by about 10:30 or 11. I mean, the Americans don't stay up late anyway, as you know. And no, though, it wasn't an all-night carouse or anything of that nature.
I was imagining a Great Gatsby-esque kind of party.
No, it wasn't. But the house definitely was Gatsby-esque, but...
Well, we'll check the price of the house now. And Tom Kite is a winner. Where was, like, at that stage in his career, was he a phenomenal player?
Well, he'd won 17 times on tour at that stage, and had near misses in a few majors, but was never considered to be a serious major challenger. I mean, he won that well actually in the end, but it all came down to the 7th hole. This iconic par 3 of 107 yards. Now, it gives you an idea of the conditions. I mean, he hit a 6-iron into it. Ooh. And pulled it into the left rough. And probably a bit like Watson 10 years previously, he tried a speculative, he had to get out of the rough for starters, but I would say like that he was trying to get it as close to the pin as he could, obviously. Anyway, it was quite a long recovery shot, and the ball ran across the green and pop.
Trickled in, okay.
It did. So he got a 2 where he was going to get a 4, make no better than 4. That would have been the estimate. But he held it together well from that point onwards, and
won well.
Deserved his win.
So fast forward to 2000 and Tiger, and this is part of the Tiger Slam. I mentioned Nicklaus in 72 was +2, Watson in 82 was 6 under, Tom Kite was 3 under in 92. Woods comes along in the year 2000 and shoots 12 under. 15 shots clear of the second place player, Ernie Els, who walked off and quipped that I won the tournament I was in.
Yeah.
Was this the most dominant performance? I don't know mathematically where it ranks, the 15 shots clear, but regardless of that, just in terms of the feel of the thing, because you were there, was this the most dominant performance we'd ever seen in a major in golf?
Oh, no question.
No question.
No question, Joe. I mean, I remember being absolutely stunned at the time. I mean, we were all sort of scratching ourselves and saying, like, can this be happening? I mean, it just didn't seem credible. Not only that he would maintain the consistency of performance on each of the 4 days, but that seriously good players like should be so far behind him. I mean, Watson said, and I always took anything that Watson said very much to heart, because he was a very keen observer on the game. He said it was unquestionably the finest performance he had ever seen in golf, bar none. That nothing came near to that in terms of its quality. And I think there was general agreement on that. I mean, as I say, it wasn't so much that he was tearing up the place. Like, for instance, we had back in 1992 a breakthrough of sorts in that Gil Morgan became the first player ever to go into double figures sub-par in the US Open. He got to 10 under and then got to 12 under and then collapsed. But the consistency that Woods maintained over the 4 days and the quality of the golf he played was just staggering. Weather-wise, it was a messy Open, as I remember it, in that there was quite a bit of fog. And
because even looking back now, and I've watched it back at times,
there was
an overcast field.
There was quite a bit of fog. For instance, on the Friday, Harrington, Harrington just finished 9 holes of the second round on the Friday and had to come back obviously early on the Saturday morning. An abiding memory is I was sitting having breakfast at 10 to 8 in the morning when I heard a double expletive, and really it was shocking. I mean shocking, Joe, by any standards.
I'm trying to think now.
And it was Tiger on the 18th, which he had to finish from the previous day. And he hooked his drive into the Pacific and called himself an effing P.
That's not that shocking.
Well, it was in that if you were sitting having breakfast and you're pouring milk on your Rice Krispies and suddenly your ears are assailed by this. Honestly, I mean, there was a huge to-do at the time.
Was it, yeah?
Oh, yeah. Oh, there was.
Okay.
And he made 6 as it happened. And the interesting thing about that was that he had only 1 ball left. When he reloaded, he had only 1... Steve Williams, I think, told him afterwards that he'd only the 1 ball left.
You elected not to tell him at the time.
Yeah.
Like you were mentioning on the phone, we chatted earlier, like that was interesting because Harrington managed to finish 5th, which was a record for an Irish player in a US Open at that time. Ernie Els was there. So that was Woods in 2000. We should mention Mr. McDowell in 2010. It's funny, like that weird period where we were drowning in majors as Irish golf fans. 2010, in some ways, I didn't fully appreciate at the time the scale of it at Pebble. McDowell, I always think of him as kind of Gregory Avray was second, and Dustin Johnson blew up very famously and very badly early on the Sunday.
So did Tiger in the final round, as it happened. Tiger had a 75 in the last round.
Well, that's the thing. So you look at the quality. So Avray second, but then it's Ernie Els third, Woods and Mickelson in a tie for 4th, and Graeme McDowell beats them.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, it's a stunningly impressive major win, Graeme McDowell.
Well, it was very difficult. The conditions were very difficult. I mean, the wind came up, and that was the year. Graeme had won in. He'd won in Celtic Manor. He'd won the Welsh Open.
That's right.
I think it was 10 days. Was it 2 weeks beforehand? I think it was 2
Something
weeks
like
beforehand.
That,
yeah. And then, as we know later that year, I mean, he was virtually unbeatable in the Ryder Cup. So it was. I don't think there's any argument, but that was Graeme's best year as a pro. I mean, like he was always. I loved the description of him by McGinley, like that he's a street fighter, you know. And McGinley put him in at number 1, as you know, in 14. Simply because of that, because of the guts, the raw guts of the man. And I remember being there. I was standing behind the 18th when he played this for the final time, and you could see him coming up. Looking back, he would have been on the left-hand side coming up, and we wondered if he'd go for the green. And as it happened, his caddy said to him, I mean, Havre had finished at that stage. So Graeme essentially, Graeme knew what he had to do. He knew a par was going to be enough. Now, I mean, the 18th at Pebble is not the sort of hole you would pick even to have a par 5 on, you know. But anyway, he hit a 9-iron short of the bunker in front of the green. I think he left himself an approach of about 110 yards, something like that, and then hit a sand wedge on to about 20 feet past on the left-hand side, probably, I'd say about 8 o'clock. No, not 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, up that way. But it was the control he displayed, Joe. That's what really struck me. As I say, I remember Conor Ridge being behind the green as well, and obviously, as many of us who could fit there, with security people going ballistic because they were assuming that Tiger was coming along. They had miscalculated, and they thought Tiger was going to be the problem from their point of view in terms of security. Whereas Graeme came along and he hit this sand wedge in. The green was very firm. I mean, you could imagine, like, for him to be out but 20 feet past, you know, you could imagine that it was he calculated fairly accurately, I imagine, but the ball just ran on. And then he had to think about getting down in 2 putts from there, you know. And the coolness of it all really was hugely impressive.
Yeah, he made light work of it. And then Conor Ridge runs on, as does his father, who's there. And he was telling a story recently where he was walking to the first tee with his dad, and things again were reasonably relaxed. And he said, "Sorry, I forgot to get your Father's Day present." And his dad said, "Well, that trophy over there would do just fine." And got emotional, and McDowell started getting emotional and had to kind of calm the whole thing down again.
It was beautiful, Joe. It was
an amazing moment, because he said his dad has been there for virtually every shot he's hit since he was year dot, you know, obsessed with his son's game.
Did he mention about the phone and the mother?
No.
On the 18th green, in his moment of victory, in seconds of it, Marion, his mother, who didn't go out there because she wasn't well at the time, she was in Portugal, and she phoned, and he spoke to her from there, and it was all just beautiful.
Yeah, it was magic.
It was magic, yeah. I mean, and Graeme is such a nice man, you know. I mean, everything fitted beautifully. It was one of the most memorable occasions I've ever experienced in golf, you know, as from an Irish perspective.
Yeah, I would
because
think so.
It had all... It's all the emotion that we crave. Sure. We seem to crave in those sort of situations.
And because he is a nice fella, it was kind of uncomplicated. There's no external factors here in a Tiger Woods way I need to worry about. I can just enjoy this.
This is it, yeah. So it was great.
Here we are in 2019. We won't be back for a men's US Open until 2027. A bit of a gap now after this one, so enjoy it while we can. One of the perennial talking points of late, but certainly this year going into a US Open, is the USGA and the mess they've made of recent US Opens. Chambers Bay 2015 with greens like broccoli, according to Henrik Stenson. 2016, we remember Shane Lowry in the hunt, and Dustin Johnson didn't know he was being penalised or not, didn't know his score on the way in.
It was just incredible.
It was quite something. Erin Hills, they kind of chopped the rough down, and Brooks Koepka had wide open fairways. And then Shinnecock last year, people will remember several of the greens, especially on the Saturday evening, got away from them. Basically, yeah. So the USGA have found a way of making a mess of this tournament. And the US Open identity as well, you know, big rough and single file fairway, they seem to have lost faith in that, or they feel that's not the right way to go about things anymore. What I've heard several players say is that Pebble Beach, because there's a tournament there every year and because of the quality of the golf course, even the USGA will not make a mess of the setup, that this will actually just be allowed to unfold quite naturally.
Yeah, I suppose the only thing they could do is to firm up the greens to a ridiculous extent. Because if you see, the R&A are so sensible, really, if we think about it, when it comes to setting up open greens. I mean, they factor in the wind all the time, you know, and you'll get, I think the arrangement for Portrush is that they're going to be around 10.5, which is relatively slow by major standards. The USGA don't seem to subscribe to those sort of principles. But so the only thing I could see them doing, now there's no doubt that on the final day in 2010, the greens were like rock hard. They really were very, very difficult. And they're small greens.
Very small, yeah.
And it means like that you've got to do one of two things. You've got to either hit your approach shots very, very accurately, or you've got to have your short game in extremely good order. In other words, you've got to be pitching and chipping extremely well, because you're going to miss greens. The nature of the course will dictate that you're going to miss greens. But that's the only thing, Joe, I could really see. Now, I was, again, doing my usual pre-championship digging with regard to the principals involved, the principal people involved in setting up the whole course. And interestingly, Davis normally has a lot to say. This is Mike Davis, the CEO of the US Golf Association. He had nothing to say on this occasion at all.
What does that tell you?
About the golf course. It tells me that he's sort of stepped back.
Pull your neck in, Mike.
I think he has stepped back, and he is more or less allowed the proper... I was going to say he's left the proper authorities, like the Pebble Beach company itself,
who know the course,
and are they know, like, You see, there's no way you can compare it to the Pro-Am because that takes place in February.
Yeah.
So you have totally different conditions. You're going to have soft greens then anyway. So it is a challenge to get the greens at the right firmness, the correct firmness for this time of year, for June. And that's, as I would see it, that's the main challenge.
And what about the US Open's identity generally?
Well, it has changed. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, there was a time when only a straight hitter and a good putter could even contemplate winning it. Now, the best players like Nicklaus and Watson and these guys always seem to be able to manage. But if you look at Phil Mickelson, I mean, he's won 5 majors, but he's been second in the US Open, I think, 5 times.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. Now, he has a better chance now, although he's getting older, obviously. He has a better chance now in that the fairways generally are more generous than they have been. But the nature of the challenge has changed. I mean, I think it was evident in the PGA. No, I'm talking about the wrong tournament. I was thinking of the recent PGA, which of course
Brooks Koepka one.
Yeah, Bruce Koepka. I was thinking of it as a US Open golf course. No, it has changed, and we got good winners, even with all the mess.
No, it's true.
You got Jordan Spieth in Chambers Bay, and then you got Dustin Johnson at Oakmont.
Yeah.
I thought Dustin Johnson's win at Oakmont was stunning. I mean, when you think of, although you wonder with knowing Johnson how much he thought about the possible 2-shot penalty that was hanging over him, but that shot he hit to the last, I mean, it was a 9-iron which finished, I mean, the 18th at Oakmont is a frightening finishing hole. And to remember, to recall what he did with it, 9-iron approach to about 3.5 feet.
It was flawless, really.
It was absolutely stunning.
He's won twice at Pebble Beach, actually, and he obviously was 54-hole leader in 2010. I mean, he's the great underachiever when it comes to winning majors. He should have more than one at this stage.
But I think there is a huge difference in the Johnson now and the guy who played in 2010. I mean, at that time, the great weakness in Johnson's game was his wedge play. Yeah. And now that has sharpened up beyond all recognition. So I don't think we're going to see the same player by a long chalk,
In terms of who this suits, I mean, Brooks Koepka, in a very Brooks Koepka way, was asked about the course setup. He said, I don't care what they do. It doesn't matter. I don't complain. So even though he's just going to swagger on in there and try and become the first since Willie Anderson in 1905 to win 3 in a row US Opens.
Yeah.
Anderson
won 4 altogether, actually.
Did he? Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Rory's missed 3 cuts in a row. He's called his recent showings at the US Open pathetic. And then, of course, there is Tiger back at Pebble Beach for a US Open. Masters in his back pocket. Tied 9th at Memorial.
I mean, if you're talking about the physical stress of winning another major, I mean, it's going to be a lot less stressful than Augusta on Tiger. I think course management is going to play a huge factor in the thing.
Which is right up his street.
I don't think the weakness in Tiger's game, and it's fairly obvious, even when he won at Augusta, he's not putting as well as he did. I mean, if he put it like he did, there'd be very little difference in his game now to what it was in his pomp. But he's still very dangerous in my view. He's a guy. I've no doubt the others will be looking over their shoulder. How is Tiger doing? Yeah. I've no question. I've no doubt in my mind about that, because with these guys, with tournament pros at the highest level, it's the ability to compete that always impresses them. That's like Nicklaus used to famously say, that. Take a major, there were only 20 guys that could possibly win, and then there were only of that 20, there were probably 10 who were afraid to win, and then I think there were probably only 5.
Koepka's talking like that now. He's cottoned on to that early, that you don't need to do anything miraculous for a huge chunk of these tournaments to win.
Well, I think if you think back on that on the PGA, there's no doubt that the way he overcame those stumbles on the back nine, on the early back nine, was very impressive because he could have been in free fall.
Yeah.
He could have been in free fall there.
He's won in different ways now, which is very impressive. He's raced away and won.
I like him in that, what you see with him is what you get, and there are no frills. I don't know if he has the game to win at Pebble. Now, that's probably a ridiculous thing to say, given him that the man's won 4 majors. But I don't think he has the finesse, the short game finesse that it takes around Pebble.
Interesting.
Or the discipline.
Interesting. I humbly would totally disagree, so we'll have to see.
Well, that's fine. Yeah. That's fine.
A US Open at Pebble Beach, always a good thing to sit back and enjoy. So
it's great, yeah. I think it's just the actual, the visual treat you get at the very sight of the various holes.
Of the Fisher household in the background as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Dermot Gilleece of the Sunday Independent, thanks so much for popping in. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe.